Yeah. Okay, so we'll start. We're starting a new Chumash, the third of the 5 books of the Chumash, with Parshat Vayikra. And to stop the email that from the couple of zealots who point out that I don't always give the source of the thing. So let me be clear, it's from the Kutei Sikhs, it's from volume 17, and it's the first Sikha on Vayikra. Before we start, I just want to give you a couple of bits of information by way of background information that you need. One is this, that what this Sikha is about, what the Rebbe is talking about in this Sikha is the apparent contradiction between two very important Jewish belief systems. One is that a Jew has to have humility. We'll come back to that in a minute. The word in Hebrew is onov. It means humble. But by the same token, it is deeply frowned on to be a doormat. So there is a tension between an expectation for Jewish behavior to be, on the one hand, assertive and comprehending one's self-worth, and on the other hand, the requirement to be humble. And the question that the Rebbe addresses in this Sikha is, how do you have real human, and you can't have any baloney in Torah. You know, you can't have somebody who pays verbal tribute to being one thing, whereas he's really something else. So when we're talking about somebody humble, we mean somebody humble. And when you're talking about understanding your self-worth, it means understanding your self-worth. So the issue is that if those two things are sincere and genuine, how do they go together? Because they are not exclusive, explains the Rebbe, they are mandatory for each and every Jew. So that's what this Sikha is generally about. Now, the other thing, before we start, I just want to explain quickly a code to you, because the Torah, in the Torah, there are not many people, not everybody knows this, but there are 3 sizes to letters. The letters, the actual letters of the Torah, are in 3 separate sizes. There are little letters, there are medium letters, and there are big letters. The big letters are all the same size big, the medium ones are all the same size medium, the small ones are all the same size small. And there's a sefer at the end of Torah called Divrei Hayomim, where it explains this code, and you get keys to understanding why some letters are bigger and why some letters are smaller. However, in what we're going to learn tonight, there is no such code, and it's explained by the Rebbes in Chabad in general, but by the Rebbe in particular, and most particular in this particular Sikha. So, l'chaim. Let's start with this. Not many people today know, because we don't have the same system of chinuch, of education, as traditional Jews have had for 3,500 years. It's only in the last 100 years that Jews went to the same schools as non-Jews, learnt the same education, had the same, or had overlapping value systems. Jewish life um, was much more Torah dominated and halakha dominated rather than just general rules. And the reason for that is that, as you know, we are supposed to be a light to the nations, and those things that the nations frivolously did during history, we were not encouraged to do. We were encouraged to sit and learn. So if you talk to an ignorant Jew who believes that he is in some way superior to his Gentile neighbor, he will tell you that Yidden was sitting and learning while the Goyim were out getting drunk through history. And although that is a shocking generalization and an ugly generalization, it's not entirely wrong. Our life system was attached to Torah and mitzvahs. Now, when a child went to Cheder, at whatever age it was, let's say it's at the age of 5, the Jewish syllabus for learning started with the third book of the Chumash, of the Torah, with Vayikra. Vayikra means Vayikra is the whole book of the Karbonos, of the offerings, badly translated into English as sacrifices. It's not sacrifices, it's offerings. And it's a very deep and beautiful reason that children start with this. They don't start with Bereshis and the creation of the world. They don't start with Moshe Rabbeinu and the miracles and Kriyas Yamsuf and Yitzias Mitzrayim. They start with Vayikra for this reason, that Jewish chinuch, Jewish education, is designed to bring to bear on a new child, a new fresh brain, a new fresh set of emotions, that he doesn't come first. Unlike modern kids who, I don't know about your grandchildren, and I don't want to speak badly about my grandchildren because I adore them, but there is a sense of entitlement. There's a sense of that the world owes them a living, the world owes them a Ferrari, and if they end up with what we started off with as a car, they don't understand why a parent can drive a whatever it is, and they start with a whatever it is. There's a totally different mindset. Now, Jewish chinuch started with kids learning that they need to bring korbanos, that they need to sacrifice their animal soul and their selfish drives for others. That is probably one of the key planks of Jewish education and indeed Jewish life. If you wanted to summarize what a religious, I'm talking about genuinely religious, a genuinely religious Jew's pathway in life, it is that he learns Torah, he does mitzvahs, but his focus is not on his primary, that his attention is to him primarily, but to others. A child to his parents, a brother to his siblings, a sister to her siblings, a mother to the children, children to the grandparents. But this concept that we have of, today every second person has a therapist, right? And the concept, and I'm not trying to lampoon that, but it's a fact that every second person has it. And if you speak to, we were talking about Habrusas, and I was saying that Rabbi Leader and I learn in the mornings. He's fond of saying, he knows a lot about this with marriages. He's fond of saying that a marriage counselor, he calls them marriage counselors. You ever heard him say that? That's what he calls them. And why? Because these therapists are very keen on bringing out their afflicted subjects, and I understand that they have problems, the people that go to a therapist, but it's all about them. It's got to be about you. It's got to be about you flowering, you realizing your potential, you actualizing your right to live. A woman is as good as a man is as good as this is as good as that, and everybody's equal and everybody's the same, and the whole system, the whole woke system, may have its merits at some level, but it's not our system. Our system is a system of respect for other people and kindness to other people, and of course each of us have our own selfish drives and our own selfish needs. But from the age of 5, kosher chinuch, religious education, is to accept that whereas it is natural to want to be selfish and narcissistic and so on, it's a problem, and it's a problem that you got to fight and get rid of. And you have to make sacrifices of your animal soul and of your ego and of your narcissism for the benefit of other people. That is the Jewish pathway. Now, how well people keep it and whether they keep it and what sort of chinuch they have is a whole different thing. And there are all attendant surroundings to this. I mean, the whole religious Jewish sexual ethos is completely different. You know, in the 60s and 70s, I can't tell you how many of the igris that are about kids in America who wanted to go to college. And in America, college is different to our universities. They live in colleges, and the sexual activity in the colleges was very rampant. And the Rebbe was very against it, not because he was a wowser, but it's a very interesting thing that in terms of morality generally, sexuality is a very strong barometer. And so whether it's you're pleasuring yourself for money, or you're pleasuring yourself for sex, or whether you're pleasuring yourself for power, or whether you're pleasuring yourself for self-aggrandizement, whatever it is, a kid starts off his chinuch learning Vayikra first. That he learns that I am not the most important person in the world. I'm here to serve my God and be good to other people and elevate things, not suck the lifeblood out of things for my own benefit. And that's a completely different mindset. And for people that don't grow up with that mindset, I reckon it's a very difficult battle to get to. Certainly it is for me. But this is the background to why kids start learning Vayikra first, and it's the background to what we're going to be talking about. Because as I explained at the beginning, this sikha, which for the guy who's going to complain that I don't quote it again, I'm telling you it's in volume 17, number 1 of Likutei Sikhs, and please, every week that I don't mention it, don't write to me. I get it. I'm supposed to quote where it comes from, and I promise you I try and do so. So but this is the dynamic that we have to deal with. We have to deal with the dynamic that Moshe Rabbeinu was an Onov, was humble. He was the most humble man on earth. It says he was the biggest Onov that ever lived. Now, so the Alter Rebbe the Rebbe explains a story about the Alter Rebbe. Our Rebbe was the 7th Rebbe of Chabad. The Alter Rebbe was the first. The Alter Rebbe had a grandson who became the Tzemach Tzedek, who became the third Lubavitcher Rebbe. And this kid was a huge genius, like all the Rebbeim were, but some showed particular. I mean, I can't tell you who's smarter than who was a bigger genius, and nobody will try. But he was a very great genius and a very great prodigy. So, and the Alter Rebbe brought him up because his father died, and he was the son of the Alter Rebbe's daughter. Or is it the other way around? I may be getting this wrong. Maybe it was the daughter that died. I've forgotten now, and to think it through is going to waste our time. It was his grandson. And his grandson went to Haida and started with Vayikra, with the third book. The word Vayikra in Torah is spelled with the last letter in the word Vayikra is an aleph. And the aleph is a small aleph. As I explained, there are three sizes to the letters. The Vayikra, the last letter is an aleph. And this little boy asks his grandfather, this little boy who was to become one of the greatest of the Lubavitcher Rebbeim, asks his grandfather, who was arguably one of the greatest of the Lubavitcher Rebbeim, why is the last letter small? So the Alter Rebbe, it says that the Alter Rebbe went into Dveikus. Dveikus means that he sort of conked out or spaced out. He sat there with his head in his hands, or his beard in his hands, and his eyes were closed, and he thought for a very long time before he answered him. And he then answered him that it is a Jew's spiritual obligation to be humble. So humble, and the last letter of the word Vayikra is an instruction to the child who's starting to learn Torah and starts with Vayikra. And the first word of the book of Vayikra is the word Vayikra, and the last letter is a little letter. And it's to teach a child that one of his life goals is to be humble. We're going to have to define what humble means, because the Alter Rebbe then went on to say to him, not like Odom Rishon. Now, Odom, the word Odom is written, starts, the first letter is an aleph, and it's the big aleph. It's the big letter, not the medium-sized one, the big one. And so the Alter Rebbe says to his little grandson of 5 years old or whatever it was, that the last letter of Vayikra is to remind him he has to learn to be an Onov, and not like Odom Rishon, who is represented by a big aleph, because he was not an Onov. But not like Odom Rishon. And the Rebbe straight away asks a very important question. He says, we don't put other people down. The Torah doesn't put anything down. I'll give you an example. When the animals went onto the Teva, when Noach took the animals onto the ark, so it says there that they went 2 by 2, and it talks about the kosher animals and the non-kosher animals. So it doesn't say those that were tochoer, that were pure, and those that were tomei, impure, which was a criticism at one level. but it uses extra words. Now, if the Torah is using extra words, that's a huge signal, because if this is God's wisdom and it's going to last for 3,500 years until Mashiach comes, and it's going to be learned in generation after generation, each person according to his own skill sets, then if the Torah is going to save as many words as possible. So why would it say the animals that are tahor and not tahor? In other words, it could use the word tomei and save a word. Why not? Because Torah is not critical. So the Torah, so the Alter Rebbe says to his grandson, so you have to understand. We have to understand why. Not only do you understand why Vayikra has to have a little aleph, but why would the Rebbe is explaining to us. But why would the Alter Rebbe say, and not like Adam Mauritian, whose aleph is a big aleph, right? So what is this story demonstrating? This story is demonstrating the initial question that the Rebbe asks at the beginning of the Sikha, and that I was trying to explain at the beginning, that there is a tension between knowing your greatness, and Adam Mauritian knew his greatness. We're going to learn about that in a moment. Let's understand who he was. Adam Mauritian was created by God. He's the only human being with his wife who didn't have parents. He wasn't a product of parenting. He was a product of God's hands, God's creation. So if he was product of God's creation, the enormous capacities and abilities that he had, what are you asking him not to understand that he had them? Are you asking him to understand that, it says that he was a neshama klolis. You know what that means? It means a general soul. He was a general soul for all mankind forever. The Torah uses a lot of baby codes for beginners and for ordinary people who are learning. In Bereshis, it repeats the story that God calls Adam Mauritian and tells him to name the animals, right? And people say, so what? The elephant is an elephant, and a cow is a cow. What's the big deal? You attach labels to it, and providing everybody agrees to the labels, you got a naming system. But that isn't what happened. What happened was that Hashem told Adam to identify the spiritual nature of each animal. And that's what it means by naming them. So in Hebrew, let me give you an example. In Hebrew, a dog is kelev, right? Kelev is kol lev, all heart. That's what a dog is, all heart.
Lev.
Huh?
Lev.
Lev.
In Hebrew, lev.
Yeah, that's right. So a kelev, which is kol lev, so when Adam Mauritian identified a dog, that's what a dog is. Dog jumps on you and loves you and licks you and kisses you and...
For your heart.
Huh?
It can translate for your heart or with your heart. Or
all heart,
yeah.
kol lev. Yeah. So that's what he did. He identified. Now, for that, it's explained in the Midrash that he had an extraordinary spiritual vision. It says that the light he ingested through his eyes went from one end of the earth to the other. He saw everything on earth. He understood vegetation, DNA, all the things that were spiritually necessary for him to understand. He understood. So how can you ask him to be an on-off? What does that mean? How can you ask him to be humble? If somebody says to Adam Mauritian, are you the greatest man that can ever be because you're made by God's hands? If he says no, he's a liar, right? And there's no prize for being a liar. So what do you do with that? So, on the other hand, Moshe Rabbeinu, let's talk about him. Moshe Rabbeinu was the most humble man that ever lived. Does that mean that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know who he was? Are you telling me that God speaks to Moshe Rabbeinu, tells him to take Am Yisrael out of Mitzrayim, gives him the 10 makos that you're going to learn, you're going to say over at your Seder tables in a couple of weeks. Brings them out of Yetzias Mitzrayim, brought down the Mon, Kriyas Yamsuf, all of these things went through him, and he's going to say to you, nah, I didn't do any of those things. He's not going to do that. So does he know who he is? Does he know what he was entrusted with? Definitely he did. And yet, he is called the most humble man that ever lived. So the Rebbe is asking this, what is the tension? How do you resolve the apparent contradiction that one man is the most humble man on earth, and yet you say you know who he is, and the other example is Adam Arishan, who is criticized because he thinks of himself as such a big Aleph. Right? That's really the question. So, l'chaim. Okay. Why do we criticize? Why do we say that Adam Arishan thought of himself wasn't such an honor? What is the implied criticism? Because there's no question that there's an implied criticism here about him. What is that implied criticism? So if we sat and Fabringed together and we said, do you reckon that Adam Arishan was a success entirely or not? What would you say? Would you say, I mean, let's understand something. Every man has to work. Every woman has to have pain in childbirth because he ate from the pre-ate sadas. And let's understand what this was. Adam Arishan was created in the morning of the 6th day. That day we celebrate as Rosh Hashanah. So it's August, September in the year, right? September-ish. In that time of year, Shabbos, he was born on the 6th day, Friday. So on about 6 o'clock, he has to make Kiddush for Shabbos. The pre-ate sadas, the fruit from the tree, the best opinion is that it was grapes. I know that in the secular paintings it's an apple, but whatever it wasn't an apple. There's a whole argument in the Torah of what it was.
Because it could make wine. Kiddush wine.
But it was the best. One thing is it says it's an Ezrog, but the main opinion is that it was grapes. Whether it was grapes or whether it was going to be Ezrog wine, he had to make Kiddush at 6 o'clock. And to get the Kiddush, it came from that tree. So the whole prohibition of not having the pre-ate sadas was from he got the mitzvah at about 1 o'clock, the Midrash tells us. He was born about 11 o'clock. Not born, he was created about 11 o'clock. 1 o'clock he got the mitzvah that he could eat from the whole garden, the whole world, everything was his oyster, but he was not allowed to go to eat from that tree. And he got that mitzvah at about 1 o'clock, and it only lasted till Shabbos. So about 6 o'clock he makes Kiddush, so he's got to desist for 5 hours, approximately 4 or 5 hours. He's married. The wife that Hashem created for him, Hava. The Gemara says there were 5 most beautiful women in history. She's number 1 on the list. So he's got nothing better to do, nothing better to think of for 5 hours than to eat from the one tree that he's not allowed to eat from. And that is a very bewildering problem for everybody who learns any Torah, whether they're Christians and monks or whether they're Yidden who know how to learn properly, the Rebbes, Tzaddikim. We've been learning this for 3,500 years, and everybody asks the same question: How could he? How could he? So there are many answers. But let me give you one to illustrate what the Rebbe is explaining in relation to the Big Aleph. Because he was such a huge capacity, because he was created by God, with such a massive intellect and massive perception, he was in Gan Eden. He saw that one of the most important creative energies, spiritual creative energies, wasn't available, and that was tshuva. Tshuva is a nuclear reactor. It is the biggest single spiritual energy there is. There are many, and you can't measure them scientifically, but tzedakah is a spiritual energy. Give tzedakah, you make money. Speech is a spiritual energy. You can take a child, and you can bring the child up. Child commits the same sin. One kid goes to the fridge and brings out the carton of eggs and drops it, and it goes all over the floor, splat, and it's a huge job to clean it up. And the mother or the father says, "Yankee, you are so clumsy. I can't believe you've done it again. You're a clumsy, lazy, stupid child. Clean it up." You know, this parent that's a kid who's going to need a therapist. Or you can have a parent that says, "Yankee, you spilt the thing, but I know what a good boy you are, and I know you're going to clean it up. So if you clean it up, then I'll admire you." So that's and that's the modern psychiatrists call it positive reinforcement. They think they've invented the world, but that is the way Jewish chinuch is supposed to work. You're supposed to do it through positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is a known energy. Negative reinforcement is a known energy. These are spiritual energies. The strongest of these energies, that are absolutely nuclear in power, is tshuva. Tshuva interferes with time. If you commit something wrong on the 1st of January and do tshuva on the 30th of June, that tshuva is a mitzvah, huge mitzvah, but you can't have that mitzvah without the sin on the 1st of January. So what does that mitzvah do? It reaches back in time, grabs that sin, brings it forward, and turns it into a mitzvah. Adam Rishon saw that there was no tshuva. Nobody sinned. There was no chance for sin. There was no mixture of good and evil. The mixture of good and evil only could come from eating from the tree. So he decided that he loved his God so much, and he loved this new world so much, this creation, that he wanted there to be he wanted to make a contribution. We all know that we're partners in creation. Mankind is a partner in creation. He wanted to be a partner in creation, and we wanted to create a pathway for this nuclear reaction of tshuva. So what did he do? He ate from the tree. Is that right or wrong? It's wrong. Why is it wrong? Because that's not what God said to do. God said not to eat from the tree. So we don't have the room to think, evaluate it, make our own judgment, take our own point of view, argue the case. That's not what a Jew does. The Jew has to do Ratzon Hashem. If Ratzon Hashem, the will of God, if Ratzon Hashem is that you're not allowed to eat from the tree, you're not allowed to eat from the tree. You think that there are benefits from eating from the tree? So what? Who are you? What's that? That's the big Aleph. That's the big Aleph who says, who postures and believes that he has something. Now, he wasn't doing something bad in his mind. He was trying to contribute. He was trying to contribute to the welfare of mankind by introducing the possibility for tshuva and introducing the whole mechanics of tshuva. But it's wrong. And why is it wrong? Because he is thinking that he supersedes Ratzon Hashem. And what the Alter Rebbe is telling his little grandson is not that he's putting Adam Rishon down, but he's warning him that no matter how clever he's going to be as he grows up, because the Alter Rebbe could see what a genius this little kid was, that whatever success he generates, he has to understand that is not something that he can use to go outside Ratzon Hashem. That's not a Jew's business. It's not a Jew's business to think for God, to plan for God. It's a Jew's business to do what God tells us to do. The better we do it, the more light we generate. The more light we generate, the better example we are to the nations, and to ourselves, and to our families, and to our Daled Amos. And as we've learned over and over again, every single person is going to be tested separately. Every person is going to have their own ability to light their own light. And as the Rebbe said, I'm sure I've quoted this before, or maybe it's been in Fabringens, but the Rebbe asks the question, that when Avram got the bracha from Hashem, Bein Besorim, between the parts as it's called, he was told that he was going to be fruitful and multiply as the dust on the earth and the stars in the sky. The Rebbe asks a fantastic question. He says, everybody knows that there are more stars in the sky than dust on the ground. Therefore, why did both legs of the blessing have to exist? Hashem could just have simply said the stars in the sky, and that would numerically include the dust on the ground. So the Rebbe explains there that the dust on the ground, what happens with sand is, for sand to have a positive functioning purpose, it needs lots of other sand. You go to a beach, you need lots of sand. You have 1 grain of sand in your shoe, it's very irritating. For sand to be a positive, it needs to be packed up with lots of other sand. On the other hand, and therefore Jews need to be social animals. They have to daven together with a minyan. There are many situations where we have to have numbers and be together and be coordinated and inter-cooperative. But there are other situations where every Jew has to understand that he has to, like a star, he has to shine with his own special light. And his light has nothing to do with anyone else's light, and his contribution is his light. Now, when Adam Rishon failed with the pre-Eitz Hadas, it was for noble reasons. Let's accept that. We accept that it's for noble reasons. But what was the failure? The failure was self-aggrandizement, that he knew better than God. And we don't. We don't know better than God. So now let's turn to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, there's no question that he knew who he was. There's no question that he understood that God was choosing him. You know, when God told him to, with the snare, with the burning bush, that he said that he gave Moshe Rabbeinu the job of taking Am Yisrael out of Mitzrayim, out of Egypt. Moshe Rabbeinu said, no, get someone else. I can't do that. I don't speak properly. I'm covered pear means that he stammers. He said, get someone else. And God said, no, I want you. And he didn't like that at all. Why didn't he like it? Now, the question is, did he not like it because he genuinely thought he couldn't do it? What sort of betoken are you asking Moshe Rabbeinu to demonstrate? Hashem's telling him to do something. He's questioning whether Hashem knows what he's talking about. There's no sign of that anywhere in Torah with Moshe Rabbeinu. So he does know that he can do it. He doesn't want the job, but he knows who he is, and he knows. So what's his rationale? What's his rationale? His rationale is that Moshe Rabbeinu understood the difference between what you're given as a gift from God and what you earn. Talent is God-given. And people who congratulate themselves for talent are exhibiting a really low perspective. Doesn't mean it's not a popular perspective. Good tennis players will boast that they're good tennis players. Good artists will boast that they're good artists. But what are they boasting about? They're boasting about something that's a God-given talent. You know, you get a gymnast who can do 6 somersaults, and I don't know about you, but I don't think many people at this table can, at any rate at our age, do 6 somersaults. But that if you can do 6 somersaults, God gave you a body which enables you to do 6 somersaults. How can you be proud of that? I mean, it's like this is an old marshal, but imagine walking down the street and saying to somebody, "Oh, you're a fantastic digester. You digest your food fantastically."
When you walk.
You're walking down the street and you say, "Oh, you know, Boris, I've never met such a good digester." You'd think he's stupid, right? Why would you think he's stupid? Because your digestion is something that is part of your body, and that's a God-given thing. That's a God-given process. You don't control that process. You're lucky to have that process, but you don't control it. So Moshe Rabbeinu thought like this: if that God gave him certain talents, if God had given those same talents to somebody else, that somebody else might do better. Moshe Rabbeinu had a lot of trouble. He had a lot of trouble with Am Yisrael. He had a lot of trouble with the man. He had a lot of trouble with the water. The well, Miriam, he had trouble getting water from the rock. He had trouble with the Meraglim. He had trouble when they built the sanctuary. He forgot about how much silver was donated, and they all thought, oh, that's where his Ferrari comes from. You know, he nicked all the silver from the. So he had a lot of trouble, and he said to himself, if somebody else had my talents, they'd do better than I do. That's real humility. Real humility is being able to see the difference between that which is God-given to you and me, and that which we earn and deserve. Now, the negative side of that earning and deserving is Adam Rishon and the big Aleph, where he thought that he could improve on God's creation. What a chutzpah. But you should know that Jews are encouraged to have chutzpah. Jews have chutzpah. And there's nothing wrong with it, providing you understand that where it comes from, and that chutzpah isn't an entitlement, it's a request. If it's a request and you don't get it, and you have betoken and you understand if you didn't get it, it wasn't meant to be, and you go and do something else, then it's all right. But if you use the chutzpah to try and do something and it doesn't work, and you go away and you're disappointed, and you go into and you sit shiva and you say kaddish and you lament it and you lick your wounds and you, why me, and I'm a victim and nothing good ever happens to me, and you can go on, and people live their lives like this because they don't understand that those things which are God-given talents, you've got to take, accept, be grateful for, thank God for from morning till night. But now you're on your own. What are you going to do with those talents? It's not enough that you can learn well. That you have. Let's take. There are people who really and truly have photographic memories. They really do. I don't want to name any names the tape's on, but there are people who are known to. I'll give you an example. There's a guy in Melbourne called Mr. G. His father used to come and collect. He was one of the founding members of the yeshiva in Melbourne. Lubavitcher was the same age approximately as the Rebbe, and he came from Russia, as did the Rebbe, through France, and they waited for a visa to America together in Paris. When they were in Paris, they were poor, all of them, but the Rebbe gave a shiur every day, a Talmud shiur. And you can imagine these guys were very smart guys, and the Rebbe was giving the shiur. So because they were poor, they had very few Gemaras, so they had to share. So everyone shared, but everybody insisted that the Rebbe had his own Gemara, and that nobody should have the chutzpah to share with him. So the Rebbe sat with his own Gemara, and the Rebbe gave this Gemara class, and he gave this Gemara class for something like a year and a half, something like that. And it was a 2-3 hour Gemara shiur. Very deep, only at the level that the Rebbe can give. One day, this man that I'm telling you about, who's dead now, Mr. G's father, he was leaving the room, and he noticed that there was something different about the cover. So he just happened to pick up the Gemara to move it over with you, and it was a different Gemara, totally different volume. The Rebbe was sitting there week after week, hour after hour, with this Gemara open in front of him, pretending to read from it. And he wasn't reading a word from this. He was giving the whole shiur bal peh, Rashi, Tosfos, everything. So some people literally have a photographic memory, just able to sit and picture the page and read it. Now, if you have that talent, to boast that you have the talent is so stupid and so low and so ungrateful that it beggars the imagination if you try and consider it. If, on the other hand, you are conscious of the fact, what have you got to do with that talent? And if somebody else had that talent, what would they be doing with that talent? And if what they would be doing with that talent might be more than what you're doing with that talent, that's humility. That's real humility. So the the tension is this, and this is the Rebbe makes all these things very modern and very topical. You know, you and I, we have a life, and one of the big mistakes that people make, and you'll see it the moment you've had this identified to you. I see it all the time. You know, you get people who'll swagger at their abilities, but they're not swaggering at their achievement. They're swaggering at God's gifts. And it's a waste of space. So the mitzvah is to be an honor. What does that mean? It means that unlike Adam Arishan, you don't just worship your own greatness. You understand your greatness, because otherwise Hashem has given you that greatness, but he's given you that greatness as a responsibility. And that responsibility is the level of humility that we're talking about. And that's what we got to do. So that's the sikha.
Okay.